Okay.
Hi, everyone. We're here this afternoon with Dr. Shawn Riley from the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. We may or may not touch upon this, but Dr. Riley is a very avid angler. Background he can tell us a little bit about. And interestingly, I do a lot of fishing too, but we've never actually been fishing together. So hopefully we can correct that once the coronavirus issues start to slow down. So Dr. Riley, I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll have some other questions from there.
Great. As Dr. Urquhart mentioned, that stretch of river behind me is American Creek in Katmai, Alaska, which is where I was scheduled to be today. That's why I'm putting it up there. It's one of my favorite stretches of trout water that I fish. And it's just another example that this virus takes something from everyone, I guess. I'm a professor of wildlife management. My background was in wildlife biology and wildlife ecology. I worked for about 15 years for the state of Montana as a wildlife biologist before taking a mid-career doctorate at Cornell University in social psychology and environmental economics. And I did so because I was interested as a management biologist on how to really make a difference. And what I saw in practice was changing human behavior. And I was really well prepared to assess populations and habitat of wildlife, but I was poorly prepared to grapple with issues of the humans involved in wildlife conservation.
Great, yeah, so that kind of leads into some of the types of research that you do, and as well the teaching that you do in is it a course called Human Dimensions of Fisheries and Wildlife? That's
correct. That's an outcome of where my professional direction is headed, and doing my research focus is principally on wildlife-human interactions, how those interactions translate into how people value wildlife or not. Looking at how communities build capacity for living with wildlife. And most recently, I've been actually working with state wildlife agencies around the country to, in an area called organizational psychology, organizational behavior, to understand how we can create more responsive, relevant fish and wildlife agencies. And the course I teach, Dr. Urquhart mentioned, is Human Dimensions of Fisheries and Wildlife. And so I really try to introduce students to all the things about fisheries and wildlife that are not about the organism and about the habitat. And everything from how people value wildlife, how those are expressed as attitudes, all the way to how we make decisions, and the range of agencies that carry out fisheries and wildlife, both in the United States, but also elsewhere in the world.
Well, great. Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that students will come into fisheries and wildlife thinking it's all about fish and habitat and wildlife and their habitat. And, one of our big goals is having them learn that there's another actor in all of that that really determines all of the ways that management happens. So given some of your interests, well, I guess, next question would be kind of where did you start from with your interest in fisheries and wildlife?
Well, I guess maybe it's more of a traditional upbringing that I grew up in a farm in upstate New York. It was a working farm. I got to see how management, that is making decisions, setting objectives, creating interventions, result in some outcome. And while those are mostly agricultural oriented, fortunately we had a lot of woodland and streams on the farm that I could mess with, move them around, make some changes. And then we had a nearby inlet to Cayuga Lake, one of the Finger Lakes in New York, that I knew every inch of, and that's where I got that bug for fishing, pursuing the various fish that ran out of Cayuga Lake, but also that were resident. And I learned a lot about their natural history, and you know, the cycle of life by growing up on that farm.
So yeah, it's yeah, I grew up in on a kind of a hobby farm, but in rural Michigan, and similarly had a creek behind my house that, you know, went and caught everything that was in it and moved everything around to try to make little pools and change it, and that was, you know, really valuable. And I think that one of the things we can think about moving forward is how even small exposures to, you know, the natural world can really help us in developing that understanding that we need. So next question I had for you, though, was thinking about major issues today in fisheries and wildlife, and if you can identify maybe a single most important issue that you think of as we look at, you know, fish and wildlife management in the 21st century.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think at the global scale, human population growth and the consequences of that growth, the pressures on the environment, which provide habitat for fisheries and wildlife, but also the pressures put on for consumption in both legal and illegal commercial harvests that are occurring from everywhere from regulated systems such as the river behind me in Alaska to the unregulated bushmeat market of Southeast Asia, one that very well could have led to this current COVID-19 virus and the pandemic associated with it. At a smaller scale, you know, if you bring it back to Michigan, just the changing demographics of people living here, where they live, increased urbanization, which doesn't affect wildlife directly in a negative way, except for where those buildings occur, but it changes what people value and how those experiences, like you talked about, Dr. Urquhart, of goofing with a stream and making things move around and seeing what the results are and getting some connection and tied in to nature. How will those people vote? Will they support conservation in the future?
Yeah, I think that is a very important one, and we see a really changing landscape if we look at the last 25 years or 50 years, from how many people are engaged in natural resource and outdoor activity, and you know what our impact on it is. There have been some positives and some negatives. You know, now we have deer running around all the suburbs in Michigan, but do we really want deer running around all the suburbs in Michigan? So, so finally, last question is if you had some advice you'd want to share with the FW 101 students or students, you know, considering fisheries and wildlife as a major and career option.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, if you're going to get in this field, you have to be passionate about it. Fisheries and wildlife might seem narrow at first glance, but it really does span the planet, everywhere from Antarctica to the Arctic, from the tropics to the Arctic. And find that part that's really, it turns you on, that you can get passionate about, and follow that passion, because you're going to need that fire in your belly, because it's not a profession that anyone gets rich in a monetary sense, but you become very wealthy in the memories and the experiences and the people that you interact with. And then if you're really interested in moving the needle in conservation, that is making a difference, then I guess I advocate for you need to understand and learn something about humans and how to alter human behavior.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate your time, and I'm glad you were able to help out and share some information with the FW 101 students.
Yeah, I really look forward to seeing everybody. Hopefully this year in FW 101, and if not there, farther up the chain and 434, and we'll look forward to that.